Hello and welcome. My name is David McElnay, and I'm representing the Executive Committee of the Urban Design Panel today and introducing our excellent panel presentation entitled Better Read Station Area Planning by TriMet. So just a quick introduction to the Urban Design Panel.
Urban Design is welcome to watch.
We hear enthusiastic people. Please mute everyone. So the Urban Design Panel is sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of professionals from those three organizations with shared interest in urban design. We're joined today by Heather Wilson, Executive Vice President and CEO of the AIA Oregon. The AIA has previously hosted this event at the Center for Architecture in Portland and now generously offers this monthly Zoom meeting until further notice. In addition to a monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as their weekly Thursdays at 3 newsletter. I encourage you to Google it and check it out. Participation in any event makes you a panel member. We encourage you to sign up for information about future presentations. When you register for any UDP presentations, you will be included in upcoming invitations. We also encourage you to send any interesting future panel presentation ideas to Adrienne Morris at AIA Oregon. And she will put her email address in the chat box as we go. These presentations are recorded and are made available by the AIA as a Vimeo file, which can be found in a link provided in the chat box eventually as Adrienne sets this up. This presentation will be about 30 minutes max and will be followed by a Q&A session. For the Q&A, please pose your questions and comments in the Zoom chat box during the presentation. Our executive committee member, Bob Boileau, is here, but actually Guy Benn's team has selected to review those questions and comments, and we'll read them out and go over them after the presentation. Follow-up questions can be sent directly to today's presenters via their email addresses, which they've provided in, I think, in the slideshow, and if not, if they want to be contacted directly, they'll provide those emails in the chat box. So with that, I will turn the meeting over to our presenters and introduce them. Guy Benn is the TOD program manager from TriMet. Fiona Lyon is project manager and design manager on this TOD program, and Miles Anderson, who is a project coordinator, TOD project coordinator. Guy, take it away.
David, thank you very much. Miles, if you could bring up the slides, it'd be great. So good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all again. You may recall I presented to the panel in December last year on TriMet's TOD program, and we'll be happy to have some conversation and questions, answer questions about the program holistically as well at the end of the presentation. What we were asked to present to today was on the Better Read Station Area planning work that we are undertaking as part of a team, which is associated with TriMet's Better Read Improvement Project. So go on to the next slide, please, Miles. This is a brief agenda. I think we can skip through this pretty quickly. We didn't, rather than jumping cold straight into this station area planning work, we did actually put some slides to start with overlying the overall TOD program at TriMet. So let's go to the next slide. So in brief and at a very high level, TriMet's TOD program has existed for a number of years. It was sort of reinvigorated under the last general manager about 2.5 years ago now, with the Director of Real Estate and Bob Hastings, who I think many of you know, produced some draft TOD guidelines, which we then took to the board. We had some feedback, and then we continued with stakeholder engagement, revised those guidelines, And those guidelines were approved by the TriMet board in May of last year. Ultimately, they set out a framework for the TOD program at a very high level with goals and objectives. And I came on board to TriMet in February of 2020 to sort of build out the program. And I'm pleased to sort of introduce today Fiona and Miles, who've joined the TOD team as we've begun to expand it, and we'll put in place and build out the framework. You know, we have multiple objectives within the guidelines. Really, it's you know, it's about to bring both development and community benefit to the TriMet network and to drive ridership on our system. You know, the graphic on the right-hand side of this slide shows what TriMet so far has delivered in the past 5 years in terms of projects. And it shows that there's a large proportion of new housing that's been delivered through the program. And we continue to do that, as we'll explain as we go throughout today's presentation. Very high level numbers. We have delivered over 720 units of housing in the last 5 years. Also delivered / under construction, and of that 720 units, around 66% of which is affordable. In terms of how the program is structured, you know, as I mentioned, the TOD guidelines set the framework and the overall goals and objectives. We've broken it up into 3 key parts. There's planning work, which we'll talk to you more about today, including a regional TOD plan, which will codify the guidelines, the Better Ed Station area planning work, which we're going to go into in detail. And we're working with a PANO 82nd Division on a Metro 2040 grant. We also have in the middle, we have projects. So really that's what happens once we've completed the planning, we've identified highest and best use and the appropriate sort of community balance and equity approach for a project. We basically look to enact the plan and deliver projects. And there are 3 buckets: there's past, current, and future projects. Past projects we just referred to on the previous slide. Current projects, which we mentioned in December, include projects like the Hollywood Transit Center redevelopment, the work that's being built, or the affordable housing that's being built at Fuller Road, and we're working on some new ones. And then we're always looking at our land bank portfolio as to future development opportunities. The final part of the program is looking at program development, where we work as a team and looking at more strategic level objectives or initiatives, such as changing legislation about development densities around stations. What can we do for community support? And you may have seen in the press recently that TriMet committed to a short-term lease over its park and ride at 122nd and Burnside for a safe rest village, and also applied research and other outreach like today's engagement. Next slide, please. These are just samples. You know, on the left, there's a this is a sample site that we own just off Moody Avenue in the Southwest waterfront. The safe rest village mentioned. There's a rendering of the Hollywood Transit Center there, and then student research, and also we've been working. Many of you saw the design competition around the Type 1 rail car reuse and the Afro Village concept, which is still moving forward with the Metro grant. Next slide, please. I'll pass it over to Fiona now. She's going to jump into sort of some more structure on the program itself.
Thank you, Guy. So yeah, I would just say generally, you know, you can see from the past 2 slides that we do have a very broad umbrella of work that we're looking at. And so we're always trying to make sure that we're trying to orient our project planning, our project work, and other future conversations around really good design standards and guidelines. So sort of branching off the guidelines that were approved by our TriMet board, these are just sort of some components of how we're thinking about TOD at our station areas from a design perspective. You know, nothing new in terms of sort of good guidance for TOD, but really just compactness and density. Mixed use, you know, I think we're really keen on providing affordable housing during a housing crisis, but I think we know that station areas need to provide a mix of community services. So making sure we're incorporating a full suite of uses. Good public realm, I think every time we're touching our station areas, we're making sure that we really are delivering comfortable, welcoming place for our transit riders and the community at large. And also thinking about station access, our stations are kind of within the larger circulation system. And so we're always trying to work with our partner agencies to make sure that we're really providing great access from a multimodal perspective. And so, Miles, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. Before we jump into the Better Ed station area planning, we thought it would be really helpful to kind of step back for a moment and just talk about one of our other projects at TriMet. You may have seen this in the news recently. It's the Better Ed project, and it was recently awarded $100 million by the FTA. They were in town in September to do a big ribbon cutting ceremony. But really, this project is a huge improvement for reliability and service within our overall network. So this graphic on the right side of the screen really shows that the goal is to extend red line service on the west side, about 10 stations. And basically between Gateway and the airport, we are eliminating our single track, which, the red line was built in 2001, and there becomes a pretty big bottleneck at the Gateway station or Gateway Transit Center today. So this will help alleviate it, really provide better connection to the airport, and yeah, really enhance kind of our overall system reliability. So this project has been, in planning for a number of years. As I mentioned, we just started construction. So here's just a general look at the project schedule. We do have some big work ahead of us, but really this gave us a opportunity to sort of hit pause and say, all right, while we're doing all this great construction work, can we really look at our station areas along the red line more holistically? And understand, are there other opportunities that we can capitalize on, whether it's looking at our own sites that we own or station access, really kind of give it that TOD lens. So if we go to the next slide, Miles, here's just a really quick, it's I think less than 2-minute video on that Better Ed project. Thank you, Miles, for driving. And I don't think there's any sound, so I'll try to narrate as we go.
I was going to play it on mute to spare you all from the reverb through the speakers.
So I believe it's about a $215 million project, and there you can see that stretch of single track. Sure, if anyone's ever taken the MAX to the airport, you witness kind of the congestion of trains in that stretch. So here's the west side. Again, those 10 stations that we're adding red service to. And then this is looking more closely at that Gateway Transit Center. You can see basically from here north, there's quite a bit of scope. We're building an entire new structure over I-5 there today. I'm sorry, not I-5, 205 or 84. Huh. There's sort of a tight, challenging weave to get under and over past Gateway Green. And we do expect service in 2024 for these improvements. So If we advance to the next slide, I think I just have a few images of the project. Again, this is a huge improvement for our system. You can see on the left side, the gateway, new structure up and over to add that second track. A little bit of changes to the gateway station itself. The platforms at Portland International Airport are also getting a little bit of reconfiguration. And yeah, I'm going to pass it off to Miles, who's going to talk a little bit more about the station area planning exercise that we are piggybacking off of the Better Ed project.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So as Fiona mentioned, a lot of our program development has been kind of leveraging resources and leveraging ways and opportunities to have funding and to bring kind of a further study into station areas to really grow their program. So that was the Better Ed project. This is the Better Ed Station Area Planning project. We have some project support from SOJ, and then we have a great consultant team that's being led by Echo Northwest, who's the prime. In addition, this project is spanning a pretty good geographical area. So we have our jurisdictional partners listed here. And I'll just go ahead and share a little bit about the structure of the grant and the structure of the project. So some of the key tasks and what we're looking to get out of this grant are listed here. But I think the main focus for us is to really produce materials with actionable outcomes. We want to design plans that don't just sit for the life cycle of the project. We really want to design plans that are community informed, are really integrated into the fabric around these station areas, and also are plans that aren't just going to sit on the shelf. We really want to have actionable outcomes to continue to pursue with our jurisdictional partners, and hopefully create kind of a domino effect of projects from planning to development on these new station areas. So a little bit about the process and timeline of the grant. The grant was awarded in November 2020, with the NTP issued in April of 2021. The estimated project completion is fall of next year. And we're currently, we've moved through kind of the grant process and the RFP. We've negotiated the scope of work and the project management plan. We've sat down with our jurisdictional partners to understand what planning work is in process and how, again, we can kind of leverage resources and leverage appreciated outcomes to kind of coalesce in the final project plan, the final station area plans. We've also met internally and externally to establish our equity lens and make sure that our community engagement strategies are robust and also will deliver the outcomes that we want. And now we're currently in process of identifying the focus station areas and really honing in on the scope of the program that we want to develop. So following this process, the next couple steps that we'll be looking at is kind of our outreach and our actual planning studies that will take place along the alignment. And then again, that's going to come together in actionable station area plans. And then again, while the project might end there, we really are going to work with our jurisdictional partners to execute and expand that work as much as possible. So I'm going to turn it over to Guy here to walk through our equity goals and our engagement goals, and then finally some of the kind of the vignettes of the project and the focus areas that we're looking at.
Thanks, Miles and Fiona. That's great. So, I think before I jump into the equity piece, the key, I think Miles really hit a nail on the head in terms of the key objective for all these station area plans, dotted along the red line where the improvements are taking place, is to identify what is appropriate for transit-oriented development, be that vertical or horizontal development at the station areas. And in determining what is, and ultimately once we know what's appropriate, we can then, it will basically ease the pathway to delivering that infrastructure. And the purpose of our equity outreach has very much been, how do we determine what is appropriate? And so, we've looked at TriMet's equity framework that we use as an agency, and we've also looked at our TOD goals that we've had significant stakeholder engagement on. And so we produce these TOD equity goals and engagement for the project, which basically there are sort of 6 key elements to it. Being it's an FTA funded project, but also because we're a transit agency, we clearly want to drive ridership to our system. We want to make it easy for people to use our system. We want to make it attractive. We want to, increase, the accessibility, of our system to the communities that it exists within. We all know about the shortage of housing. And so clearly, where opportunities exist, we want to deliver new housing, and we want to deliver housing that's appropriate for each individual location. We do believe that there's obviously a high correlation between low income and our ridership, low income families and our ridership. But we also believe in the value and the importance of having mixed income neighborhoods and creating true communities. We want to use the station area planning to support the communities. We know, as I said, the lower income individuals rely on our system more than those with medium or higher incomes. So we want to make sure that we provide that accessibility. At the same time, we also know that when we deliver new infrastructure, it can result in increase in land values around that infrastructure. So we're looking at it with a displacement perspective as well, making sure that whatever we do doesn't force people away from the neighborhoods they currently live in. Transparency of how decisions are made and how do we deliver our TOD is absolutely crucial. If we want real meaningful engagement with the community, we have to be transparent. And so that's a key goal within pretty much everything, not just this project, but our whole TOD program. And the impact, obviously we've all seen the extreme weather events and experienced extreme weather events. What can we do, whether that's increase plantings and trees around our station areas, or what other measures, or use more renewable energy? What other measures can we take that will minimize the environmental impact of new development? And finally, the other equity piece that quite often is overlooked is obviously we're looking at equity to the communities that the light rail touches and passes through. But also, how do we make sure that when we go about, whether that's even in consultation or whether that's in delivery, how do we make sure that we promote equity and workforce opportunities to those that need it most in our region? Next slide, please, Miles. So this slide is really, this is part of that equity analysis and approach. And it's something that we had our consultants produce early on. And it's effectively a table which assesses different metrics for each station area. And I won't go into it in detail. I think there's always multiple considerations, and those of you that are from planning backgrounds will know very much, there's the different considerations that you need to take into account. But we obviously have this sort of front and center in defining and trying to identify what needs are, what desires for the community are, and often they're not necessarily the same. And what can we do to go about, addressing some of these issues where there are particular requirements or absences of services, etc. Next slide, thanks, Miles. And so that leads us on to sort of the various study types. We have basically listed here Some of the studies that our consultant, we produced a menu of options. And one of the challenges we've had with this project is that there are actually 13 stations on the alignment that are being impacted by the Better Red project. And we've been trying to identify which ones, need attention, which ones, have the most likely outcomes or the lowest barriers to development, and trying to weigh up what we can do where with the budget that we have available through the grant. So you can see that there's a number of different studies that we've identified. A lot of the pretty much all the land that TriMet controls on the Better Red project is outside of the immediate transit infrastructure is park and rides. And so there's this constant tension between the ridership that's driven by park and ride customers and the fact that park and ride is sort of the antithesis of transit-oriented development because it creates a sea of asphalt around the station area. And so how do we offset those two elements? We are increasingly, and I think the language and vernacular in the TOD world is increasingly looking not just at simply delivering density around transit stations, but recognizing that transit can't be everywhere. So how do we improve accessibility? We've been looking at that. And Gateway is one of those areas where I think we'll do quite a significant access studies, also at Park Rose, to work out how do we improve, how do we help, how do we use this grant, and how do we plan to improve accessibility to the network? And then there's the traditional feasibility studies and massing studies, but we don't just simply want to put blocks into a rendering. We also want to give careful consideration as what should be the mix of uses within those blocks. Next slide, please, Miles. I'm just checking the clock. So we've got a couple more slides, so take a couple more minutes. But this is, this is just obviously a plan view or map view of the Gateway Shopping Centre. And just to give you an example of, the approach, I think we're cognizant that, TriMet is not, we're not a planning agency. We don't determine, zoning code or building regulations. We can try and exert influence where appropriate and make recommendations. So we do want to sort of stay within our sphere of influence, but we also want to look holistically, not just at our land and simply say what can we do on our land. It needs to integrate with the surrounding area. And one of the Gateway's a good example. One of the, there was a plan for TOD at Gateway that Prosper Portland, or PDC as its predecessor, initiated back in 2006. And it sort of got to phase one, and then it hasn't got much further. And I think we will be using this grant to identify how do we drive it to the next level. There are 3 parcels at Gateway labeled 1, 2, 3 on this map, which, within sort of immediate control in inverted commas. For those of you that don't know this area, number 1 is the parking, the surface parking for the Oregon Clinic building. Number 2 is the Oregon Clinic building itself. Number 3 is TriMet's parking garage. And there's an opportunity. Those were the original 3 parcels that were part of the PDC sort of master plan. The phase 1 was the construction of the Oregon Clinic medical office building and TriMet's parking garage. And both those buildings were designed to have additional floors added to them. That's not happened. But we're going to look at how do we, for example, maybe potential to expand the TriMet parking garage, which will unlock the surface parking lot numbered 1 below. I try not to get into too much detail because of time, but we're also looking at station accessibility that we talked about. Gateway Green is located off this map just to the north, but it's a huge success story. And we see it as there are people coming into the Gateway neighborhood to use that park and the bike facilities there. And I know Paul, who's here with us today, has been deeply involved with that. We recognize that there's a disconnect between the neighborhood and the transit center. So we have had conversations with Pat Trust, who own the Gateway Shopping Center, and also with Portland Parks and Rec about, is there potential to look at a greenway that would connect between the two and link to the east to Gateway Discovery Park. We also recognize that if you look at the multi-use path that exists alongside the blue line, it sort of switches from the east and west side of the alignment. And with the Better Red Improvement Project, there's going to be a new path that runs east of the alignment from the transit center up to Gateway Green. And then at the moment, with the current configuration, you're going to have to switch to the west side until you hit Gleason Street, and then you go to the east side. And the problem with that west side piece of the multi-use path is it doesn't provide any of the residents that live along 99th Avenue or to the west or to the east there, any access. They have to go up 99th to get to the transit center. So we're going to look at seeing whether or not there's scope to move the multi-use path east of the alignment so that it would run through what is the surface park and ride that TriMet currently, it's ODOT land that TriMet operates that gateway. Next slide, please. The second example that we've included today, and this is the penultimate slide, is Willow Creek. Willow Creek is a park and ride out on the west side. It's on the border between Hillsborough and Beaverton. It's just, I think it's from memory, it's 4 and a bit acres. It's not entirely asphalt, as you can see from the aerial photo on the left. Actually, the top part of the park and ride is grassy area. We do have a parking agreement with PCC, who have a teaching facility just north of the sort of the bus station. It's actually not outlined, it's just to the north of the bus line there. But that park and ride operates below capacity. We've had inquiries in the past from Washington County about this site, and we feel that it's a site that is ready for development, but we want to make sure it's right. And we need to, so as part of that, we're going to be reaching out, looking at a community needs and gaps analysis, working with the community to understand what the community would like to see here. I think we would like to see a mix of uses, because we feel that there's not a lot of neighborhood retail that's this to the north of the alignment. There is some to the south on baseline, but if the alignment itself and getting there is quite difficult from this site. We'd also like to see, I think, a mix of incomes. And there's quite a substantial amount. There's pretty large affordable housing complex immediate to the east. And so we're going to look at seeing whether there's potential for workforce housing or some other forms of housing, that isn't just pure affordable housing across the whole area. And how do we incorporate that development with the community college and make it into a very more holistic and community oriented place. Next slide, please, Miles. So that's it in a summary, basically. Just to go back to Miles's point, really what the core aim behind the station area planning is to facilitate the delivery of both vertical and horizontal development at these sites. And we don't have all the answers now, and that's why we need to study it. That's why we need to conduct the community engagement. There will be, and I think Chris cognizant of our audience today, this is hoping, with the aim of this project is ultimately, once these studies are complete, we'll have direction, and then we will be able to engage professionals like yourselves to take these initial concepts and really put them into, turn them into reality, turn them from plans into actual projects. Bringing in capital partners, making it easy for capital partners to see what's acceptable at these sites, identifying which grants we can go for, whether they be environmental grants or other grants to deliver some of the other infrastructure and make it happen and hopefully improve these station areas. So that's it in a nutshell. And I see a bunch of questions in the chat box, so we'll stop sharing. We'll share this obviously, and then we'll jump into some of the questions.
Sure. So just as a quick transition, Guy and his team have agreed to take a look at the chat, take a look at the questions. I think maybe Miles, have you been picked to read through those and read them out loud
Yeah.
and pick from your team who wants to answer them? And I just wanted to step back a second and say that's a great presentation. Really appreciate it. The slide that you just showed at Willow Creek Crossing, we were able, City of Hillsborough in Washington County with private developer, we're able to just put 120 housing units in a, I think it's a 4/1, it's at least a 3/1 structure in that very difficult triangular piece of land that looked like grass right there, that now has people living in it and riding TriMet every day. So anyway, take it away.
All right, I'll be our question moderator. The first question, Don's got a lot queued up for us. Thank you, Don. The first question is, will you be considering moving any stations to foster TOD to maximize TOD opportunities? And maybe I'll start, and Guy, if you want to build on anything, or Miles. I would just say, having worked on the Southwest Corridor light rail project for a few years, I will point out that planning, designing, and constructing light rail alignment is pretty expensive. And so I would say we're not really at the point in our TOD program where we're looking to move the alignment. It's more to look at parcels along existing alignment. The way I kind of approach this is that we generally have a pretty good infrastructure system from a transit perspective. And now we're really kind of putting our lens towards how can we make land use complement that transit adjacent to our alignments and our stations. I'd also say that may present pretty big operational impacts if we were to start moving around our alignments from an engineering perspective. We're definitely, as we're looking at, for instance, on the Southwest Corridor light rail project, when that picks up in the future, looking at how that alignment really can be optimized to really get the most TOD benefit out of that. I see Gary with City of Portland, or City of Tiger, down the call. He's been instrumental in helping us look at that from sort of an on-the-ground planning perspective. But I would say, in general, we're looking at kind of existing opportunities for properties that we already own.
The only thing I'd add to that, and thanks, Fiona, is that, with the existing alignment, it's really, really hard to move it, and there's definitely not scope within this project to do that. There's a new platform being built for the Red Line, which is part of that double tracking, which will sort of exist in front of the Providence Medical Office building at Gateway. But what I would say more is that we know we can't change the alignment per se, but what we can do is that we're definitely looking at accessibility. And so, if we can improve accessibility, through example, at Gateway, if we create a greenway that runs east from Multnomah, what does that do in terms of delivering TOD on parcels that TriMet doesn't own? Like maybe, we know, for example, Pac Trust is beginning to look at their shopping center and think long term about how that might be repositioned into a more 21st century mixed use project. So, that's how we're trying to address that part.
All right, I'm going to ask Don's second question, which is, how will you measure TOD equity goals and engagement? Do you have a target or requirement for new affordable housing units, increased ridership, etc.? And same thing, maybe I'll kick us off. I would just add that in our TOD guidelines, we have a sort of portfolio-wide goal of 30% of our opportunities or projects that we develop would provide 60% or less area media income. Guy, do you have anything you want to add on that?
I think to some extent, we obviously have our TOD guidelines that have set the broad level, and it's a relatively low threshold of 30% of all land that's used for residential development. The housing should remain affordable in perpetuity. We're already significantly ahead of that, with our current portfolio. And I expect that these projects really, I think what we're doing is by conducting a community gaps and needs analysis, and by doing other analysis, around and trying to deliver mixed income, is that we will be, and listening to what the community wants, we will identify what we think the right threshold is at each location. I think there's, we talked about Willow Creek to some extent, where we talked mixed income. That's our internal view. We have still to engage with the community. The community say we still need more affordable housing, and this is the best place because there's no else. Then we will, we will work with that and look at that holistically within the bigger picture. I think one of the things that's, quite often forgotten is that we still, we have, there's a fiscal responsibility as well. I mean, we want to be using where we have a valuable site, not necessarily these sites, on the better red, but we do want to monetize the valuable sites so that we can reinvest those proceeds to unlock sites that are more difficult to deliver. And that's a long-term program goal for the TOD program. So it's really on a case-by-case basis, but there isn't any set beyond our TOD program sort of objectives and thresholds. There isn't a set guideline, except on the equity contracting within the grant, where I believe from memory, I think it's 30% of MWDBE participation, and Echo Northwest have been leading that, and actually I think we are ahead of that goal as well.
Awesome. All right. So David has a question now. Is your TOD planning finding a balance between designing quality open space available to the public versus exploiting the monetary value of the land? And I would just say that was kind of the intent of that graphic that has the 4 design principles based around transit, is that, it is a balance of all of those things: achieving density, creating really high quality public space. They're often best when they work together. So it's definitely a keen interest for us.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's tough. It's very, very hard, but there are opportunities, I think, that exist. We've reached out to ODOT, for instance, because a lot of the land around the around the Gateway Transit Center is, ODOT right of way. And, how do we, there's an absence of trees in Gateway, and we know that the correlation between trees and quality of life is very high. And that's part of the concept by creating a greenway as well. It's only a small step, but at least it's something that will hopefully improve, the neighborhood and those public spaces. We're deep doing it at Hollywood. We're spending a lot of time and effort to try and create a public space that really, feels, it belongs, and it's community oriented, belongs to the community. So it's a very big challenge. We're absolutely not going to build, sometimes those public spaces, they are catalytic, because then obviously things come around them. So it's, we are trying to look at this is why we don't want to be planning simply just, we're looking just at our land. We're looking obviously what's happening in the immediate vicinity around it.
All right, I'm going to read the next question, which is from Don. It is, what is your concept for an ideal TOD that is measurable and addresses your equity objectives? How do you build upon successful TOD along a corridor, for example, Aranco Station? Should these complement and support or other stations, or be standalone TOD?
Okay. Good question. I think, you know, a great TOD addresses the community needs and provides resources and opportunities that the community needs. I also think, you know, and it can work both ways. It can, you know, if you think about, I mean, Arenco is used as a, you know, poster child for TOD, and for good reason. You know, it is of an era that, you know, before I think there was less focus, you know, on the need for affordable housing back, you know, when it was conceived. But it's a good TOD because it obviously created a sense, it has a sense of place. It, you know, provided needed housing in the area, but it also acts as a destination for people coming in. And I think we don't need to. Sometimes there's this, because of the desperate need for housing, it can be a little bit. We can be a little bit short-sighted about, you know, just needing what's the community need, what's the community need. But by bringing people in, it then creates opportunity for those living in the community at the same time. But it's a fine balance, as we know, between doing that and causing displacement. So weighing those up, you know, should the TODs, you know, are they mutually exclusive or do they overlap? I think they should very much overlap. You know, we really want people, you know, there's opportunities, I think, for commercial space, and there's opportunities for, you know, residential oriented projects. And you know, if they're on the same corridor, then that makes it very easy for people to get backwards and forwards between them. It's just not easy, you know, when you start taking that bigger picture, you know, because the two sometimes are interdependent. But those are the sort of the high level goals. I don't know whether Miles or Fiona has any other thoughts to add to that.
No, I think you hit it pretty well, Guy. I think another thing that we're trying to do kind of in response to that corridor approach is to really be holistic about what we think TOD can be. You know, obviously the housing crisis has really kind of crystallized and focused a lot of the provision for projects on large parcels that we have. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do, given that our holdings is usually just leftover parcels, is really looking at what transit adjacent spaces can we create with leftover parcels that might not be able to host, you know, a large dense housing project. Like, how can we benefit the community or produce a space that you would want to access via transit that doesn't already exist, like on the corridor or in the community.
And I would maybe just build on that a little bit more from like a mobility perspective. You know, I think as we look at our existing transit centers, I think historically, you know, transit centers were transit and parking for a lot of transit agencies. And I think we're really trying hard to make sure that we're thinking about that multimodal connection. You know, TriMet really wants to be a service connector and a service provider. So making sure that we're not just providing, you know, great access from the TOD to transit, but also to make sure that the network of sidewalks and bike lanes and options for bike shares and kind of all those things are coalesced around our station area. And so that's where the kind of public open space really comes in handy, is because that becomes sort of your front door for all of those options. So yeah, I'd say just kind of looking at the mobility side of TOD is a huge focus for us as well. And thinking about how we, you know, kind of put things around our station areas from a kind of priority or a hierarchical layering system. Okay, looks like we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to keep moving. The next question is, how does the gateway concept align or address the Portland's vision for center? This appears to be a timid approach.
To answer that, I mean, it falls. It's a starting point, and you know, I think the Gateway there's been a lot of planning around Gateway over the years, and we recognize that there's a lot to do, But we think that we really need to, partly it needs the market to come to Gateway, which is happening. So there's a factor of time because, as we all know, development needs demand, and demand has to, provide a certain amount of revenue in order to be viable. But we also work with the city of Portland, and we have a limited budget, but we also heard from the city of Portland is like, stay focused, because from their experience in the past with some of the planning exercises, that they were great in terms of big picture vision, but ultimately there was so much in them that it hasn't happened, or hasn't happened as fast as people would have liked, because there was perhaps too high an objective. So yeah, it's a small start, but we think that by creating, for example, whether that's if it's station accessibility, we think that will definitely help catalyze things. And it's also partly, I think there needs to be a change in mentality towards and people's perception of Gateway as an area, and that will only come with projects that are delivered, rather than plans that sort of should paint the vision, if that makes sense. I mean, listen, if we can find a developer like Holland that will go ahead, like Holland did at Arenco, and go ahead and build 5 buildings at once, a Gateway, we're going to jump on it. But that's unlikely, and so we're sort of slightly more focused on our approach.
Thank you, Guy. Okay, so keep moving through these. Jonathan asks, what are your overall corridor targets for numbers of ridership, new dwelling units, new affordable units, new jobs, first mile, last mile connections from stations to areas outside quarter-mile radius? What are your overall corridor targets?
So the answer is that we don't have targets for those metrics at the moment. And that is one of the reasons why we're producing a regional TOD plan, which is going to look holistically, basically what we own and we'll run. We have a matrix of basically metrics that we will basically assess sites upon, and then we will be able to sort of what's viable and what we think we can deliver, and then we can set some targets that we think are achievable. So that's work in progress. There's a lot there to unpack. I mean, candidly, that until last year we didn't have adopted TOD guidelines, so we're still very early on in our program. And as we build it out, the questions like these are really helpful, because obviously they keep our focus on it in terms of, right, let's put these metrics in place, and then that obviously brings transparency to our in regards to our performance as a program, and how we're delivering on the goals. And there's also, I mean, it's difficult to put exact numbers, because we could take a very aggressive stance, in which case we would go ahead and we would solicit as many possible proposals from developers, but does that actually meet what the community wants? And we have to sort of weigh that in. So it's obviously it's a somewhat of a dynamic process, because things are permanently changing. But I think as we complete our regional TOD plan, we'll be able to put some more targets and metrics to our objectives, and how many sites we propose to move forward on an annual basis, or how many units per year, etc., and answer some of those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. I would just say or add that we're not terribly prescriptive right now. We as TriMet are not developers. We do own land, and so part of it is, again, seeking that community interest, and also kind of seeking developer interest in just general opportunities. Okay, so our next question comes from Kyle. On the Gateway site, is there a plan to expand the garage prior to developing the existing surface lot, or will that project be tied to that future development?
Great question. Hopefully not. It's a factor of there's clearly budget considerations. the challenge that exists there is that the parking lot for the Oregon Clinic is to serve that building, whereas the garage is to serve, mass transit. And so, can we create an argument to the FTA and others that we're justified in either borrowing money or securing a grant to extend the garage that will then allow a developer to build out that that Prosper Park, because Prosper Portland owned the Oregon Clinic car park, or can we work with Prosper to find a way that means it's not prohibitive to build on that lot? So that's part of it. And so Echo and the team will be conducting feasibility analysis and massing studies to try and unlock that question. And at least if we know the scale of the challenge or the scale of the ask, for the garage extension, and maybe that we decide to put housing on top of the garage. We haven't got that. We haven't even got to that level and decide to sort of do a more traditional, tuck under parking model on the Oregon Clinic parking lot, or there's still a lot of moving parts, and we're not jumping to any conclusions as to what goes where. We need to study it. We need to look at the different feasibilities of each approach. We need to conduct some community engagement and speak with other stakeholders as to what the right approach is. But where we can remove the whole concept behind the station area planning work is to remove, if not barriers, certainly uncertainty that developers would otherwise face. So if we can give them a clear picture as to what's required, then hopefully we can go out and solicit proposals and get aggressive and deliverable proposals to bring this stuff to life.
All right, so I think we've got time for a few more, but David, go ahead and give me the flag when you think we need to wrap up. So Paul asked the next question. Guy, I think you'll like this one. Sites like Gateway Transit Center have a variety of vacant and underutilized private properties adjacent to the parcels that we are looking at. In what ways are you engaging these property owners, many of whom may be eager to contribute or find synergies with the TOD program?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So Gateway, there is a group called Livable Gateway Coalition, which is basically a collection of all the property owners that own parcels in and around the Gateway Transit Center. As part of this station area work, these neighbors, they're stakeholders as to what goes on at the transit center. So we've been engaging with them. We are trying where we can is to at least highlight opportunities that exist. So encourage them. So if they know that there's going to be new access, potentially either east-west or from the south to the Gateway Transit Center, can that spur development? We're also bringing their attention to programs. There's an FTA loan program that gives very favorable debt for development, TODs, bringing that to their attention and really trying to bring them into the planning process, not necessarily planning their line, but at least giving them transparency so that they can, hopefully be inspired to, move and do something with their parcels.
Hey, Fiona, it's David. We're down to about a minute or two. There's a question, if you skip down to Morgan Mayoli's question, I think that's a good one and different than a lot of the questions that have been knocked around. We have time for maybe one more. She asks, I didn't quite catch what you said about community engagement. There's Morgan now. Are you engaging communities currently, and or does engagement extend the planning and design phase of each station area? I'm curious about the design team's ability to engage in community conversations. Tell us where you are with that right now.
Yeah, I'll jump in and then maybe Miles or Fiona if I miss anything. So what we've done is, in terms of scoping the project, is that we have identified different studies to conduct there are 4 key station areas, 2 on the east side, 2 on the west side. We have JLA, who is a sub with Echo Northwest, who's basically working on the community engagement front. And at Gateway and Willow Creek, we're going to have more extensive community engagement, which hasn't begun. We're still at the sort of starting line to basically do that community needs analysis, gaps analysis, and start hearing what the community would like to see at these areas. We at the Park Rose and the Beaverton stations, which we're also studying, it's a little bit higher level. And so we're doing more of an accessibility study, and it's going to be more retrospective, where we'll perhaps, if we get to that stage or at a future point where we take these studies forward, we'll then say that this is what the qualitative and quantitative analysis produce, and then get community input on that. So it's tailored for each station area, but we still to commence it, and we are looking and we're trying to identify sort of community champions, for want of a better word, to work with at each location, because in our experience, lots of people are not comfortable speaking with transit agencies, and some of it's lost. We speak in a crazy vernacular which they don't necessarily understand. So find somebody that can really be approachable and engageable is another objective, so that we make sure it's truly meaningful, and there's all that accessibility issue, etc. So we are taking all that into account.
That's really great. It's actually 1:01 p.m. and we will start losing everybody right now because the lunch hour is over, and I'm just going to quickly say thank you so much for your presentation today. There's other comments and questions. There's a great encouragement from the Washington County Housing Authority at the bottom there of the chat. I encourage you to take a quick look. And I want to say, speaking in terms of vernacular, that this presentation, your work in this station area planning, development, analysis is very exciting, because it's a new piece of the vernacular at TriMet. And I would say in general, transportation oriented, entities opening up conversations like that. So I applaud the hard work you're doing to kind of get this new facet of TriMet up off the ground. I know for a fact, having seen the rail planning engineers a year ago for the Red Line, there was no conversation about station area, anything. So this is really fun to hear. Guy and Fiona and Miles, thank you so much. I think you're going to get a bunch of comments and questions following on. If you want to put your emails in the chat, if not, we can channel them through our executive committee. So it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for attending. On behalf of the executive committee, I'm David McElnay. We're very happy to see everyone here today at the Urban Design Panel. We do not have a subject set for next month. We will shortly, so look for it on AIA event calendar and in the email announcements. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank
And
you
yeah,
all.
email
Yeah.
us in the chat.
Thanks.